Cry is a series that hasn't changed a whole lot over the years, but they do have a nice selection of games. A lot of you guys regard Far Cry 2 as the underrated one, but most of you said Far Cry 3 is the best, and yes, as a 12-year-old when it released, it was also my favorite. But Far Cry 2, compared to all the other games in the series, is a unique experience that sets it apart, and it also appeals to a unique audience that differs from people that played the later Far Cry games, which are much more watered down and casual in nature. But if you've played any of the Far Cry games, or Far Cry 2 that is, I'd love to hear what you think about them. Or you can comment random food recipes, I don't really care, as long as you comment then I'm happy. But nonetheless, let's get into the video.
What the hell? All of us God!
But I want to start off with the storyline. I personally wasn't a fan of it, and I found it really confusing to follow at times, especially as an adult. As a child, I was clueless. I just thought it was an African simulator, but you can play as one of 9 different characters. It doesn't matter who you pick. Really, it just affects who your companions are. But you're a mercenary who is sent to some unnamed African country that is currently undergoing a civil war. The 2 rivaling factions are the Alliance for Popular Resistance. They just want to take control of the country and oppress the civilian population, or what's left of it. But you also have the United Front of Liberation and Labor, who also want to take power and oppress the local populace, but you can't actually tell them apart, and that's the whole point, because they're just as bad as each other, and you as a mercenary don't really care what happens in this country. As long as you get paid, that's really all that matters. Because I mean, let's be honest, we can look at a country like Somalia, and do you really care what's happening there? Now obviously, I don't want to be disrespectful to people, and if you are watching this from Somalia, but once you arrive in Africa, you get malaria, and you pass out and wake up and meet the person who you're here to assassinate, and that person is the Jackal. Now, he speaks in this low tone, and it can be kind of hard to understand what he's saying half the time.
The real bloodletting has begun. We're gonna cure these men of their disease, you and I. We're gonna pull it right out of their veins.
But considering there's theories out there that he's Jack Carver from Far Cry 1, or I'm pretty sure that might have been actually confirmed recently, but honestly, after enduring what he had to go through in the first game, I don't blame him for going a little bit crazy and sounding a little jaded. But you end up doing missions for these 2 factions, hoping that they lead you to the Jackal. And these missions are pretty simple. They say do this, you get paid up front, and you go complete the task. However, you have companions that you meet throughout the game, or buddies, and they'll call you up offering an alternate way to do the missions.
Why are you gay?
I don't know about anyone else. I always did the alternate tasks simply because I felt like I'm missing out on game content when I don't go and do them. You also get improvements to your safe houses, and if you go against what your companion wants, they'll ring you up and act all passive aggressive even though you don't really owe them anything.
Big fucking strokey nonce!
Because you have a best friend companion who will actually offer you these alternate tasks, and you also have a buddy who will actually revive you and act as a lifesaver. But oh yeah, did I mention that you have malaria? And just like gonorrhea, if you ignore it, it gets worse. But you have to do these quests for the underground, which is pretty straightforward. Get passports, drive to the safe house, kill bad guys, and that's it, you get pills. You can also do assassination missions, which are pretty repetitive. Go to this location, kill the man who doesn't look like any other player models. It's pretty straightforward, but a little bit repetitive in my opinion. But this does give you extra diamonds, and you can also do gun store missions to unlock new guns, and you do this by destroying a convoy which follows a predetermined path. You can drive into the truck, but you have to deal with its escort, or you can park a car in the middle of the road and channel your inner Irish and car bomb them. And unlike in Far Cry 3 where you get guns for free when you liberate the radio towers, you still have to pay for them in Far Cry 2, which is good. But once you do enough missions for the main factions, you get tasks with assassinating a faction leader, and that also determines who betrays you. Once you complete this, you're given a choice. You either save your buddies or you save a bunch of civilians. It doesn't actually matter who you choose, because either way you end up getting taken out and being rescued by the man himself, the Jackal. But you get introduced to a new district, which in my opinion was worse than the Northern District, because the layout of canyons and stuff made navigating a bit of a prick to do at times. But once again, you go and do more missions for the main factions until you get tasked to go to a prison riot, because that's where the Jackal is. And this is where things get interesting, but also a little confusing, and I'll do my best to explain it because I'm honestly still a little confused, because now the Jackal starts having like an epiphany, and you hear from various audio recordings that can be found throughout the map that he's like, you know what, war's pretty bad, so instead of killing him, which was more or less the whole point of the game, you now work together. It's like, I'm a mercenary, I don't give a shit. I'm here to kill this that's what I'm gonna do, but you don't do that. You end up actually tag teaming it with him. And some people theorize that you're the Jackal, like you're having some schizophrenic episode or like some Fight Club type deal. It's a little bit silly, but you have to get a briefcase from your companions who actually betray you. This is also one of the saddest moments in the whole game, because while I didn't have that much of a personal connection to most of the companions, except for this guy, he was a top bloke, okay? He was a stand-up guy, and when he emerged from behind that helicopter, it was a real kick in the teeth. I was genuinely upset, like he betrayed me. He was so loyal, he was so good to me. We went through so much just for money to get in the way. Now you can either take the diamonds and run without actually killing them, but I got taken by surprise and I unfortunately had to put them down. And usually when a companion goes down, you can use the needles to bring them back to life, but this time that wasn't the case. You have to put them down. And at the very end of the game, you're given a choice, and it doesn't really matter which one you choose because you end up dying regardless, but you either use a car battery to cause an explosion that destroys a canyon, preventing any enemy soldiers from getting to the civilian convoy, or you can take the diamonds and bribe the border guards. And if you take the explosive route, you end up dying, but if you take the diamonds, it's implied that you shoot yourself or that you die of your malaria. It's not necessarily outlined exactly what, but you can just know that you're dead. You die, that's it. And some people say that this is a good thing and that it can be compared to the Far Cry 3 ending, that the land that you've put yourself in has caused you to have irreparable changes that'll make it really hard to go back to your normal life. And this is either due to the senseless killing that you've committed or the fact that you have incurable malaria and that you're as good as dead basically. But some people also say that everything that you went through in this game makes you no better than the Jackal himself, because he is someone who was supplying arms to these people, causing lots of atrocities in this country, and here you are, you come along, you use these weapons that he supplied these factions with, and you just kill hundreds of people just in search of one thing, and that was the Jackal. You contributed to the turmoil and destruction of this country, and really that doesn't make you any better than the people that were fighting this war when you think about it. It's open for interpretation really.
16 times the detail.
But I want to move on to the best aspects of this game, and that is the attention to detail. You can really tell that the devs went above and beyond to make the world feel as realistic and believable as possible. Sure, games these days look absolutely stunning, but some of them are pretty hollow and don't go deeper than what you see on the surface. For example, when walking in a ceasefire zone, if you bump into someone, the way they react to you is determined by your reputation level. As a low-level scrub, if you bump into them, they'll insult you, and if you point your gun at them, they'll actually respond with hostility. If your rep level is higher, such as a level 50 mafia boss, but if you bump into them, the dialogue will be different, and if you point your gun at them, they'll actually put their hands up and back away, and the soldiers around them will actually respond to this and acting hostile towards you by pointing their guns at you. But the cool thing is, if you continue to be hostile without actually firing anything, they'll actually start shooting at you. And it honestly blew my mind because I tried to be hostile towards them in a non-shooting way, and I'm like, will they actually respond to me? And they actually did, and it blew my mind because I didn't actually know that this was a thing in the game until recently. Dialogue in combat will be different. If you're a high reputation level, they'll actually act fearful, whereas if you're a low level, they'll actually insult you.
Yeah, back away. Bye-bye then, tell your mum I'll see you tonight.
And this is fantastic because it actually makes you feel like the things that you do in this game have a bigger effect on the wider game. And as a result, the higher reputation you are, the better the enemy's weapons are. Another example would be getting missions from the factions. Sometimes the right-hand man will brief you, but when you have a higher rep level, the faction leader themselves will actually talk to you and brief you on what you have to do. Another cool feature is the road signs will actually change color when you're doing missions. But speaking of the map, you don't have a mini-map, you have a handheld one which also has an indicator that tells you where briefcases of diamonds are. Now, as a zoomer with a bad attention span and isn't intellectually gifted, I struggle to use the map at times, but that's my fault. That's not the game's fault. This is my fault because you have to use the map to strategically plan out the route you'll take to your destination, because if you don't do this, you might end up running into more outposts than necessary if you actually planned out the route you'd take and as well as have gone off-road. There is a half fast travel system. You can use buses to get to predetermined areas of a map.
Bus wankers!
but from there you have to actually drive to your destination, and this is where some people criticize the game by saying that you drive for 5 minutes, encounter an outpost, get chased down by the AI, because every vehicle you get, right, I swear it has like a lawnmower engine, or they've put a fuel governor in it, and the AI have these like turbocharged Toyota Technicals who drive up your ass like a tradie. And for those who don't know what a tradie is, it's a tradesman or a builder, and I swear to God, tradies just like to drive up your ass for no reason. It's like a requirement for becoming one. But a criticism of the game is that if you clear out the outpost, the people actually respawn back there. Now, it makes sense why enemies respawn at these outposts for many reasons, one being that it's a war and you leave the outpost unattended, so the faction that manned it might send reinforcements to back it up. Also, if the outpost didn't respawn, we'd have the same problem in Far Cry 3 where you drive around the map and it would become pretty boring because there's not many things to shoot at. However, I do agree that they do respawn a little too quickly and it became tedious at times. However, if you plan your route and drive off-road and try to sneak around them, then you can avoid most gunfights. And the thing is, when playing Far Cry 3, the first thing that I always do is clear out all the outposts and do all the radio towers, and then the game becomes significantly easy, but it also does become a lot more boring. But the weapons are also able to jam. Some people say they jam too quickly, but it's still a little better than Fallout 3's implementation. You can also buy weapon upgrades that prevent them from jamming as quickly, as well as accuracy upgrades. If you pick up an enemy's gun, there's a strong chance they've seen heavy use and they'll jam a lot more frequently, opposed if you were to buy them from a gun store. If you continue to use a gun that's seen heavy use, after a while they'll eventually break, and the unique animations for when a gun jam is fantastic and they have personality attached to them. The more a weapon degrades, the worse its accuracy, and even with rocket launchers, mortars, and the Carl Gustav, they can become extremely deadly to use because they can explode right in front of you, as well as prematurely detonate. Speaking of rockets, there is backblast that can start fires behind you, and speaking of fire, some people regard it as some of the best in video game history, and I have to say the fire mechanics in this game are just fantastic. A favorite weapon of mine is using the flare gun, or aka the instant bushfire. Every Australian fears it, but a good tactic I found is that you can fire a couple of these at an outpost to cause a fire and it will rapidly spread, sending the enemy at the outpost into a panic. And the rate the fire spreads is determined by the environment you're in. In a grassy savanna with lots of dry grass, fires will rapidly spread and can catch you by surprise. In damper jungle environments, they won't spread as fast or even just outright stop. The unique healing animations traumatized me as a child, and as an adult I still cringe a little bit when I pull a piece of metal out of me or I fix a dislocated joint, but these animations only appear when you're on the brink of death, otherwise you stab yourself with morphine. I assume it's morphine. I was also reading an article about Far Cry 3, and at the start they're like, oh yeah, this game doesn't care about your feelings, this is a hardcore experience and only people with pubes can withstand it. And then later on in the article they're like, oh yeah, the healing animation and the need to fix a damaged car frequently sucks, and I'm like, make up your mind, mate. Another good thing about this game is the AI. In my playthrough, some of them were having some nervous tics and would spaz out.
I've got a good feeling about this. How about we pay you right now for the work,
How much the motorcade?
Some of the characters spoke too fast, and using a knife for stealth takedowns is pointless. You're better off aiming for the head with stealth weapons. But if you lob mortars at a base or snipe the enemy, even though they might not see you, they will get to cover and even carry their wounded friends to cover as well. Depending on where you shoot them, they will react appropriately. And they can even try and get up and get to cover and try shooting you with their secondary. Another nice attention to detail is the destruction and overall physics of the game. Objects don't disappear when you shoot them, they actually bounce around. Bullets sound different when hitting different surfaces, and even wood chippings go everywhere when shot at. And oh my god, the explosions are intense. They are loud, and even some structural pieces can be destroyed, sending debris all over the place. And this includes foliage as well. And this all makes it feel like you're in the shit, like you're in an action movie, I suppose. But moving on to the overall gameplay, and I want to address some of the criticisms of this game as well. The movement and graphics still look and feel great. They aren't stiff or clunky, and if you told me this game released in 2012, I honestly would have believed you, because in 1440p, it looks stunning, and you can even enhance the graphics with mods. But the malaria gameplay mechanic, I didn't find it that good. It makes sense, especially when it comes to the endings, and it also makes you feel vulnerable. But it does get a little tedious where you have to drop what you're doing to go and deal with it, and it just pads for time in my opinion. But we're gonna have a little bit of a science lesson. The reason why the character isn't that athletically gifted in this game is because malaria is a parasite that takes over red blood cells and makes them borderline useless. And this is bad because red blood cells transport oxygen around the body, and this is why in game you run and jump as if you're a pack-a-day smoker. But honestly, there's just too many things to cover in the attention to detail department, so I'll just leave it at that. We can't talk about this game unless we talk about the totally accurate and realistic depiction of firearms. I'm kidding. Some of the weapons are inverted. Now, you can probably say that the Jackal is importing only left-handed weapons. The RPG, I can't explain this. I can't even find a good law excuse to explain why the fuck the RPG sight is on the side unless it's some weird Bulgarian RPG knockoff. The way the gun sounds can be a bit of a hit or miss. Some of them sound pretty decent, but some of them also sound pretty shit. And I put them on the same level as the game Homefront, which has the saddest sounding M4 in video game history. Some enemies can also act as bullet sponges, and it just feels like you're hitting them with BBs. Maybe they're hopped up on adrenaline and they don't feel it. I've seen a couple of shootout videos where people can take a whole magazine and keep going, so I suppose my criticism can be invalidated by that, but from a gameplay perspective, it did get a little bit frustrating at times. And I understand if you're firing hollow points ammo at someone who's wearing body armor, but I don't think that's the case. But you do have a nice selection of different weapons that range from snipers, SMGs, ARs, MGs and specialist weapons, and even a couple of hidden weapons, and they each have their own purpose on how you want to tackle an encounter. I do believe that snipers are the way to go, and I didn't find any other reason to use any other gun since I could snipe them and then move in with a MAC-10 and obliterate the remainder. So having a secondary when I have an AR wasn't that useful, but I did prefer to use the IEDs or flare guns instead of a traditional sidearm. But you can use stealth-based weapons and aim for the head and pray you don't get spotted. But when I was playing on the Xbox version of the game, there were no quick saves. The only time you'd get to save is in a safe house or in designated locations. And this is good because it adds a layer of survival to the game where you have to be very careful every time you leave the house. But in the Steam release, you do get quick saves, and this does take away from the experience in my opinion. However, the quick saves did come in handy because I did encounter a bug or two, which will happen if you play this game, so just be mindful of that. But look, I'm personally not a fan of the storyline in this game. The gameplay is where it really shines. And the thing is, if you got the attention to detail that's in this game and apply it to current Far Cry games, sure, they'll still be similar to their predecessors, but goddamn, I do believe that the games will be significantly better. But if you liked me talking about this game, I'm sure you'll like my other classic game reviews that you can find on screen. Anyways, my name is Tantu, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Peace.